we're talking about this dealing with divorce and dealing with some of the fallout from divorce. Maybe I'll word it that way. And it's literally a time where your world can come crashing down, and it's almost mandatory that regardless of your opinion of the divorce, like maybe it's something that you finally want, or maybe it's something that you've suffered through and someone drug you into a divorce kicking and screaming. There's all kinds of stories about divorce and about the types and challenges that come with divorce. But one thing that we can rest assured is that it is a time for redefinition. And whether you've been divorced for 10 years or 1 year, or you're heading into maybe a situation where you might become divorced, whether it's your first divorce or second divorce or ninth divorce, it's literally, if you feel like you're floundering a little bit, or if you feel like you're just floating and you don't have a lot of direction, then it might be that tonight we'll have some tools that you can gather from our discussion together that can take you into a direction where you can feel some empowerment, you can feel some sense of solid ground under you. And that's my goal. My goal is to help us all find this idea of who we are and what type of person or individual we are going to choose to be, and then move ourselves forward under any circumstance. And I think that the word any circumstance at the end, it gets a little shocking at times. I'll have people in the last 35 years of doing clinical work with couples, I'll have them say, look, it's not always up to me. It's not, there's so many other factors, like my ex has to cooperate, or my in-laws have to cooperate, or there's so many things that have to fall into place. And while that being true, we're going to talk tonight about a really clear, I won't say simple, but at least clear strategy where you can, under any circumstance, take back a semblance of control to where you feel like you can lose the anxiety and pick some direction. And so I have 3 sections that I'll cover, and I'll cover them as clear as possible with how I think about things, as well as keep them short, so that at the end we can open it up to maybe a forum for questions of each other. You guys can add some of your experience to my accounting, and you guys can like help each other out, and we can ask questions of each other. So I'll take one section will be dealing with children. The middle section will be dealing with you, the individual. And then the third section will be redefining a governing purpose for your life, which is kind of the juice of the whole evening, is that redefinition of your governing purpose. Because really we do everything on purpose, and it's generally some either very well-known purpose running in the background of our own subconscious, or it's something that's very out of our awareness running in the background. Like if we hate ourselves and we feel like we're losers, and it's just always kind of back there that I'm not a good person and I mess everything up, then we kind of meander through life messing a lot of stuff up. And so we want to laser focus that governing purpose that runs in the back of our minds, so that we can maybe at least have a fighting chance in this super slippery world of getting ourselves on track that makes sense to us. And so to start with, if dealing with divorce, one of the very first questions that I'm asked in my office when couples are struggling with divorce, and again, it might be that they're just newly divorced, or this could be stuff that's been going on for a while, but they wonder, like, how do we talk with our kids, and what's appropriate to share with the kids, and what's like maybe taboo things that you shouldn't offer up to the kids. And one of the first things that we talk about with my treatment team, with the parents, is just remember that your kids are really, really smart, and they see everything, they catch on to everything. And so to try to bluff them or to try to trick them is really a futile exercise. And it's best to not try. It's best to be really clear, really honest, and stay within the context of their developmental understanding. And so a 2-year-old will get a very different idea from you than a 14-year-old. A 6-year-old will even more so have a better grip on what's going on than a 3-year-old. And so you really look to your your child's vocabulary and the type of questions that they're asking to guide you. But the overarching principle is that both parents will maintain love for the child, and both parents will dedicate themselves to spending time and energy and invest in the child. Now, there's going to be a whole bunch of you that will have a spouse that won't cooperate and won't spend time with the child. And so what I'm talking about, this very first part, is the ideal. The ideal would be two parents sitting down with their whole family at the same time and having the emotional maturity to be able to explain to the children that, mom and dad are not going to be living with each other any longer, but we both love you and we both are dedicated to invest in you. And we're going to live in different households, and there's going to be a very clear parenting calendar of where you're going to be spending your weekends. And we'll make it just as clear for you kids as we can. And if you have feedback for us along the way, you can give us feedback and we'll try to adjust to help meet your needs. That would be ideal. Now, I don't know very often ideal happening, though it could. That's the guide, is where the kids get this sense of unity at that point. Now, a lot of times, because we're divorcing, it's because we aren't very good at being unified. And a lot of times there's a lot of chaos and there's a lot of mischief that goes on during a divorce. And when dealing with kids, I always say that whomever I'm talking to, I look right at them and say, look, you can't control your spouse. You can't make your spouse be nice. You can't make them say nice things, but you can control your response. And so the hardest thing you're going to do is to have your spouse call you a B word behind your back to the kids and trash you to the kids, and you don't respond in kind. You just maintain a sense of peace and maintain a sense of, here's my boundaries, here's who I am, and you just keep moving forward. And believe me, I'm a farm boy from Idaho that if you give me a dirty look, I try to give you two dirty looks back. I get that notion is easy to fall into that trap of getting even. But with kids in divorce, if you can just monitor yourself and stay as much out of the conflict as you can through the divorce and allow attorneys to handle it or handle it behind closed doors in another a building somewhere, maybe in a therapist's office, but make every attempt to not deal with that loud anger and not deal with the retaliating, not deal with the expressing certain things to the kids, like your opinion about the dirty so-and-so that's saying bad things about you. Try to keep all of that off the table so that the kids can at least have one place, your place, where there is peace and there is a little bit of a lack of contention to the best of your ability. And that'll help the kids a ton, because what kids do from birth, even in utero, but definitely throughout their life, no matter what developmental stage, is they have chemicals that are released when there's chaos or a lot of crisis thinking. If you have a ton of anxiety and you're wound up and angry and you're maybe even letting bits of your anger out, your child's going to release those same chemicals and is going to feel that same almost buildup of tension inside of them, and they won't understand it. And so it'll just sit there and fester. And that's how a kid in divorce turns into a more kind of an anxious, nervous kid, rather than a calm, maybe understanding and this kind of sucks, but I get it kind of kid. And so we want to be super careful. And honestly, I got to tell you that if there's two households and one of them's chaotic and one of them's peaceful, you'll do a world of good for the kid, because they'll have time in a peaceful household. And so I know those of you that care enough to come to things like this, I know you care enough to really kind of monitor yourself on that. And so that'd be my first challenge, is to really try to keep above the chaos, try to not do the retaliatory get even or bicker or defend yourself even at times, which I know how difficult that can feel sometimes, to not even defend yourself. And so the ultimate goal isn't to have a child that's completely obedient through any kind of a crisis or a divorce process. It's more to have a child that is not afraid to share hot, heavy feelings. And so as you see maybe this tension building up in your children, as you're looking at them and watching them and listening to them as you go through the divorce process, it's tempting to want to distract the child away from uncomfortable feelings and like, hey, let's go buy a toy, or let's go on a motorcycle ride. Let's not feel that way. What's better is to help just pause everything and help the child at any age define the feeling, like identify it. You might have to give them a mood cue, like hold up a picture of facial expressions and, smiles and frowns and cries, and ask them to point at which one they're feeling if they're really young. If they're maybe in that 8 to 9 to teenager range, you can say, well, happy, sad, scared, or mad. What's closest to how you're feeling right now? And get them to identify what they would label the feeling as, and then get them to the very best that they can talk about it. And you can maybe even share that you feel that way sometimes too, and that you understand, and that it's okay to feel this way, because we want to really reinforce that no feelings are bad. It's an expression of feelings that might harm us, not the feelings themselves. And so sometimes that's scary for us parents, because their feelings can be super big and they can be super powerful. And we might be afraid that maybe they won't calm down, but kids have an amazing ability to self-soothe if they're given space. And it's more when we try to take that space away from them that it's difficult for them to self-soothe. Like if we tell them to ignore their feeling or stuff it and let's go do something fun instead of focus on that, then they start to lose that ability to soothe themselves, because they're looking for that external distraction as well. And so I'm moving really quick, but you get the idea. The idea is that we don't want to be afraid of our children's feelings. We want to keep what we disclose to them limited to what their basic understanding and their vocabulary is. And we want to tell them the truth. And so let's pretend for just a moment that you've got a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old that both notice that that dad doesn't come over at all. And you talk with those two very different. The 4-year-old is super dependent. And so the 4-year-old's mostly going to be concerned about, if you think through the lens of a 4-year-old, their main worry is attachment and safety. And so to help that 4-year-old understand that they're safe because you're there, you're safe because when dad does come over, then you'll make sure that it's a safe experience for them. And just assure them about their safety. Now, the 9-year-old is going to be very different. The 9-year-old is now thinking the world revolves around him or her. They're very egocentric, and they start to believe that the reason dad isn't coming over, or mom, if it's mom, but just in this example, I'm using dad. They're going to start to do one of two things. They're going to blame you, or they're going to blame themselves. And so they start to think, well, this is personal. This is an attack on me, and it's mom's fault that dad's not coming over. And so as the parent that's there, you might be the receiver of all the anger, and the parent that's disappeared might be the hero. And so if you can avoid taking that personal and just realize, okay, this about 7 years old to about 12, the world revolves around the kid in his mind or her mind, and everything's personal. And so they're just looking for a way to make sense of it. And so allow them that feeling and allow them to express it. They might need to be mad at you for a moment and express that. And then you can slowly kind of insert some truths as you work with your child. And I probably wouldn't lead with, no, it's your dad that's abandoned you, not me. I'm the one that's here. You would lead with, I understand how you must feel. I understand that it looks like maybe it's my fault that dad's not coming over. I want to assure you that I will allow dad to come over during his parent time and take you. And sometimes dad decides to be busy at work, and you'll start to understand that. And maybe when dad comes, you can talk with him about it. So you're not minimizing the child's fear. You're not lying to the child and telling him that dad's, at Disneyland with someone else, or you're not trying to make excuses for dad. You're just telling the bold truth in a very gentle way. And from about 7 to 12, you do that very clear, short sentence, direct. Once they're teenagers and they're into that flexible thinking, more often than not, you can say, I would like you to talk with your father, or I'd like you to talk with your mother about that the next chance you get. And if you need me to help you, make space for that, because they're flexible enough in their thinking to do their own negotiation and to do their own talking about how they feel with the other parent. The only time I wouldn't do this is if there's domestic violence potential or very serious addictions that perhaps we even need to have supervised visitations for. So there's some extremes that you would not do some of these interventions, but you get the idea is that you look for the developmental stage of the child and you keep them abreast of what's actually going on in a gentlest way as possible, and help them come to terms with what the actual reality is. There's 5 coaching tips that I'm going to toss you that a researcher named John Gottman, he did a bunch of years, like 35 years of research on couples. And he included as part of this research, parenting inside a divorce. And actually, it turns out that these coaching tips are good for kids that are not going through divorce, as well as kids that are going through divorce. But they were developed for parents to help their children deal with emotions. And so the 5 tips, and I'm going to get a handout out to Lana that she can pass out to her, put on your discussion boards or wherever she puts it. These 5 emotion coaching tips for parents. So number 1 tip is really be aware of your child's emotion. Try to not hurry over it. Try to not help the kid avoid emotion. Just be aware. Be aware that your child's feeling something. Watch for changes in play. Watch for changes in facial expression. And just keep your eyes open and just know your child. And that's super healthy for a child to know that they have that kind of parent coach in their midst. Number 2, recognize how your child expresses emotion. Just kind of recognize and watch for drastic changes of that. Watch for opportunities to teach when they're sharing a big emotion. And again, I think a lot of times when it's a hot, uncomfortable emotion, the younger the child, the more apt a parent is to try to help distract them away from the emotion for fear that they're hurting too much. And really, a child knows how to regulate too much. They know how much they can hurt, and they actually know how much they feel. And so it's better to let them feel it. And as scary as it is to step into the ring with them when they're having these big moments, these big emotions, it's super intimate. It's a super connecting, bonding time, and it's super brave of you. And your child will remember that. They'll remember those moments way more than the distraction that you might have prepared or provided for them. 3, listen with empathy and validate the child's feelings. Now, validating isn't always agreeing. Validating is saying that you hear them. Like, I hear that you're really angry at me right now. You might know that it's not super fair that they're angry at you. You might really believe that it's just unfair even. But to say, I understand that you're angry with me is powerful. It tells the child that they get to have feelings and they get to have their emotional response to the world, and they get to base that upon their own limited understanding of what's going on. And so as they learn and grow, they'll change and evolve their feelings. And if you're patient and just hang in there with them and ride that wave with them, there's going to be a day where they start to really, on their own accord and volition, understand what was actually going on. And you won't have to always maybe come off as that defensive parent that's trying to always defend themselves. You can really let that kind of evolve, as hard as that sounds. And so listen with empathy. Really try to climb inside your child's world and help them see that you do understand that they have this feeling. You do understand that it's big for them and that you want to help them come to terms with it. Part of what we do is help our children. So this is tip number 4, help them label these emotions. One of the most difficult things for a child is to go through a brand new experience with feelings, but not quite knowing what to label them. And so to help the child kind of nurture that understanding of what's the difference between anger and frustration, what's the difference between a feeling of loneliness and a feeling of abandonment, and help them really clearly kind of decide and define what that is. And the older the child, the more, quite honestly, I'm like this old guy, and it's still super handy when my wife will pause and slow things down with me and help me like identify what an actual feeling is, instead of the 3 that I kind of turn everything into. That's like us old guys, we turn everything into anger, frustration, or impatience. And so, there's like 400 other emotions I could feel. And it's like weird when she points that out to me. And so with our children, we want to do the same thing. We want to point out to them that there's like this list of things with different grades of joy, excitement, sadness, terror. There's all kinds of levels, and we can help them define that. And it's super handy, and it helps them develop into an emotionally healthy adult if they can understand how to label their emotions correctly and and clearly so they can feel understood. Set limits when you're helping your child solve problems, and the limits have to be around, like I'll use the word violence. I don't know that it has to always go clear to violence, but like if they're breaking things, we don't have to validate and be empathic and let them break things if they're hitting us. So there is limits, and you can teach them about boundaries during this. The boundary ought not to be, don't you dare be mad, or I don't want to hear about your angry, self. But if they're breaking things, or if they're tantruming to a point where it might do self-harm, if you've got maybe a 14-year-old that's cutting as part of how they're showing their anger, there's boundaries and limits that you want to be super clear about, that you're going to get either professional help, or you're going to have a little bit of a timeout if it turns into something that's inappropriate for your family rules and those types of boundaries. And so I think we all get the difference between stuffing a feeling and then a behavior that's going out of bounds. And so we want to make sure that we're super clear with that with our kids, and again, effectively use timeouts to emotionally self-soothe and take a walk, or maybe take a moment and just draw something and get yourself distracted, get your heart rate down. One of the most difficult things that I find parents struggle with when they're right at the beginning, middle, and right in that area of divorce, when they're flooded, is it's hard to have your front brain flooded and be a good coach. And so just know that if you're dealing with a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, you're going to make a ton of mistakes, and it's completely okay. It's almost like the heavens open and know that you're not super capable right now because of some of the traumas that you're suffering. And it's almost like our kids seem to just catch the good stuff and catch the things that you're trying to do, and it will turn out okay. So don't be super hard on yourself if you're going through maybe some betrayal trauma or abandonment trauma, or if you're going through the initial stages of divorce where you feel like, oh my gosh, I've spent my whole a young adult life investing in a couplehood, and now I'm going to be single, and I just feel completely lost. And you're not at all expected to be really good at anything for a little bit there while you're getting your feet on the ground. And so please be kind to yourself, and remember that everything has a habit of working itself out. As Lana said that earlier, and I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense about what we're talking about. We were fooling around with Zoom, and it was cutting out on her, and she goes, well, let's just get everybody on and it'll work itself out. And sure enough, we've got everybody on and it's working itself out. And so that's literally how it will be for you. And so as we talk about some things tonight, and you think about yourself and you think, oh my gosh, I've made at least 4 mistakes, and you might start to feel bad. I want you to stop yourself, take a deep breath, and realize that if you're going to be okay, and you're going to have a lot of time to repair any mistakes that you've made. You're going to have a lot of energy at some point during this process to where you find yourself, and you'll pull it all back together. So be super kind to yourself. That's probably my main point there. If we would shift to that second, that really the question that I get asked with a lot of fear, right at the time where there's all of a sudden this certain knowing that there's going to be a divorce. I was meeting with a couple actually about 4:00 this afternoon. Super, super high conflict, super, super cool couple. Like, they are both stellar individuals, and they are just toxic together right now. Angry, they can't say anything nice. And when I calm them down, it lasts for about a half a second, and one of them says the wrong word, and it just flares back up. And it is just aggressive and loud. And they're talking about doing a timed separation where there's rules that they keep. And I'm inserting that, like, you're not doing the rules right now. Why would a separation help you do rules? And we're talking about maybe some ideas around what they might do. And they're at a place where they're going to at some point decide to get a divorce or not get a divorce, and they'll find some footing and they'll make something work and go that direction. And they're right on that verge. And one moment they've almost both given in, and they've decided we're going to get a divorce, and they've And then the next moment, it's so invested in screaming at each other to get better so they can stay together that it feels like a whirlwind that's just chronically knocking them about. And I imagine some of you have faced that. I imagine some of you have went through that terror that's involved in, I might be single again, or I might have to live with this contention forever, and that's not acceptable, or I might, and all the what ifs and all of the confusion. And one question that constantly comes up is there really joy after a divorce? Is there people out there that can get through a divorce, get on the other side of it, and actually even look back and be grateful for the divorce? And I want to tell you that there is. And the second thing that gets told to me is they feel like it's naughty to say that they are glad they went through the divorce. I just want to tell you that's not a naughty thought. It's okay to be grateful for whatever experience that you've been asked to go through. It's okay to look back with some sense of pride and joy that you've suffered a great suffering and that you've risen above it, and you've found purpose and you found sense for your life. That's completely okay. And there's not one higher power or one person that ought to tell you that, well, that means you are less than, or that means that that's a naughty thought to say that it's okay to get a divorce, because there's times where it's necessary. There's times where there needs to be an escape hatch, and there needs to be some kind of avenue to get some peace and solace in your life. And there's also times where that it's not stuff that you asked for. It's not stuff that you chose, but now you've got to make more than just the best of it. You've got to make, beautiful things of it. And so, yes, there's life after divorce. And yes, there's a process. There's some foundational skills that can really help along the way that we're going to talk about. There's literally an opportunity to transition into a different way of being, a different way of living on the other side of a divorce. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and think about that couple that I mentioned that I met with earlier today. And I want you to think about the whirlwind or the turmoil that they're in. And to them right now, they would say that they can't see beyond the turmoil. They can't see beyond the pain that's there. And they just maybe hope to get in a little less pain. They're not even considering joy for the moment, whether they stay together or not. In fact, he's brought up, and they've both brought up at different times, that maybe for the kids, we ought to just, do this until they're out of the home. And all of the things that you hear, all the things that maybe you've even thought yourself. The one thing that the foundation principle that we talk about and that you and I tonight are going to talk about is that while there's so very few things that you have any actual control of, your response is something that you can control all of. And so just ponder that for a second, that there's so few things that you have control of. Like, you can't control the weather. You can't control your kid's mood tomorrow morning. You can't control your ex's ability to keep their word. You can't control your neighbors, cars in the street around you, but you can control your response to everything. Now, that's a powerful feeling, and that's a foundation principle that if you can remember, when I feel anxious, it's generally because I'm looking outside of me for things to work out. When I feel at peace, it's when I look inside for how my response is going to be as I go forward. And if you can just always remember that when I feel nervous and anxious, it's because I'm looking elsewhere for control. When I'm peaceful and calm, it's when I'm managing my response. If I try to manage my kids' response to the world, it generally frustrates me. If I manage my response to my kids, then I'm going to do okay, because I'm going to choose good responses. I'm going to choose responses that make sense to me and make my life, better. And so one principle that we talk about tonight, and it'll be throughout, is that how are you going to respond? As you're building this foundation, there's 17 do nots. I'm going to run through them with just a couple of comments and give them to Lana in a handout as well. And these are just like common sense. You all know them, but they're bold black and white that you can like refer to, you can think about. These are the 17 things that over the last 35 years, I've seen create messes for couples going through divorce and for the redefinition of their life and finding purpose. These 17 things show up over and over again. So I made a list just slowly over the years, and this is just something for you to think about, okay? So one, do not say anything about your ex out of spite, like just to get even or just out of spite, just keep it to yourself. Now, remember I said be honest to your kids. They really don't need to know your honest opinion. They need to know what's actually going on at times. Like, dad's going to be late. Not your dad is such a slacker. He's always late. You see what I mean? It's like, we don't need to share our opinion. Don't say things out of spite. Don't try to get kids on your side. I know a lot of times I hear and I see this in the clinical practice that I manage, that a lot of times your ex is trying to get the kids on his or her side against you. It's always best to stay out of that fight. It takes two to have a tug of war. If you let go of the rope, they're going to be pulling all by themselves. And kids are actually super smart at a very young age at seeing who the mischief maker is. So if you just stay out of that fight, you'll do much better. Don't jump super quick back into the dating pool. I see a lot of rebound relationships, a lot of just super messy things. And a good rule of thumb, and I know you guys have probably all talked and heard about the rule of thumb is about a year. And really what that year is, it's not a hard, fast, like 12 months. You know, it's literally go through the different triggers each season brings that arise from the trauma that you may have suffered getting out of and being in a marriage. Go through the different triggers into maybe some of your moods, into the triggers into some of the maybe betrayal trauma that you suffered, or maybe the abandonment trauma that you suffered. Whatever it is, just take some time and get yourself to understand your triggers, understand what makes you tick. And it takes time to do that. And if you jump right back into the dating pool, it's almost like you're not going to work on yourself. You're going to go work on getting somebody to work on you for you. And so just be wary of that. Be super careful about sharing everything on social media like it's a personal journal. Just be very careful of that. There's going to be a time where you read back over things that you wrote if you do that, and you're going to think, oh my goodness, what did I say there? And it's there. It's there for like maybe ever. And so just be super careful. If you're a person that likes to share, that's okay. You might help someone, but don't share everything in that place. Don't expect to never see your ex-spouse again. Don't get caught up in this idea that we're going to get a divorce. I will never see them again. We will drop off at McDonald's. I will close my eyes. My kid will jump out of the car. It's not reasonable. You're going to see them again. And so own that and just prepare yourself for it. Prepare yourself for how you're going to stand firm and hold your head high and be as proud of you as you actually are, and just move yourself with nobility through the crowd, and you'll see your ex again. You'll be able to handle that. Don't try to turn other people against your ex, even if your ex is Satan or worse, a narcissist. Don't turn people against them. Don't try to get your family or friends to choose sides. Don't avoid going places because your ex might be there. Okay, if you are from Southern Utah, it's a small community. You don't want to be stuck making all your decisions based upon where someone else might be. Don't eat your emotions or starve yourself. Okay. Both of those things can be habit forming. They can get you miserable. So just be super careful about that. This one's a hard one, but it tends to, every circumstance is different. I get it. And if you've made this work and you find it's okay, I'm not condemning it, but I rarely see it work for you to stay connected to your ex-spouse's parents and family. It's sad. I get it, because some of you might have invested 30 years with your ex's family, the in-laws, and you might love them. They might love you. But chances are they need to support their child, their son or daughter, and chances are you need to move on so that you can truly move on and have that, not have that trigger connector to the divorce and some of the sadness there. Be careful about demanding that your ex-spouse become reasonable all of a sudden. You know, if it was chaotic before the divorce, it's probably going to be chaotic around parent time after the divorce. And so just be ready for that, and it'll mellow over years in time, you hope. But to spend a lot of time demanding and kicking and screaming, just lean into it and do your best to manage your responses. This is a funny one, but I'm telling you, it's potent. Just know this. Don't run and get a divorce tattoo. Now, I'm not actively for or against tattoos. It's your choice, but I wouldn't run right out and get a divorce tattoo like I'm glad I got rid of blank or whatever. Just be super careful because they're super permanent, kind of like putting everything on social media. If it's super permanent, you want to be super careful. Don't avoid married friends. If you have friends that you had when you were married with your spouse, there's a little bit of dividing up, but don't avoid them. Don't decide that you're going to write them off because they're married and you're single now. Your married friends still want you as a friend. Chances are you could have some really rich friendships there. Don't turn into a perfectionist. Just be yourself and don't, I have one client that was going through a divorce over this last summer, and they decided we're going to, it was a lady in this instance, and she decided that she was going to be the very best home decorator ever in her neighborhood. And so really went all out on Halloween decorating, went all out on Thanksgiving decorating, went all out on Christmas decorating, kind of wore herself out because rather than facing some of the things she needed to face, she poured all of her energy into being perfect at decorating the outside of her house. And again, it's totally okay to do that. I'm not suggesting it's not okay, but to wear yourself out trying to be perfect at something to make up for a divorce is not the healthiest approach, because you don't need to make up for anything. You just need to respond well and be yourself and lean into your new life. Be super careful about sex with your ex. And it's kind of a thing out there that people talk about, but it rarely ends well. Men and women look at sex so differently that it might be a warm bonding experience for one and a taken advantage of for the other. And so ex sex is generally something that will not turn out well. And so be wary of that, and be wary of getting maybe pulled back into intimacy or sexual feelings by a narcissistic ex-spouse that just wants to hurt you. And there's a lot of that happens. There's a lot of conversation around that. So be super careful and keep your boundaries where they need to be so that you can be happy and that you can help yourself move forward. Don't make a list and keep it of the wrongs committed against you. Don't refuse to forgive. It's okay to forgive even the most vile of people. It's okay to forgive them. This next one, which is the second to last one, these last two, and again, I'll have this in a handout to Lana. You can take a look at them. Don't apologize for being divorced as you move forward in life. It's not something that you have to apologize for. It's not something that you have to explain about yourself. It's something that you let people know when the timing's right. If you've spent enough time to understand yourself and you're moving into the dating world, that there's a point where you disclose that you've been divorced, but it's not something to apologize for, and it's not something that you need to feel embarrassment about. And so again, that final one we talked about a little bit, it's look back and find ways to be grateful for the experience. Look back and find all of the blessings and the rewards that came from the strength that you've developed. Now, as you do that, and as you begin moving forward, I've got to challenge you on this one thing, and then we're going to open it up to questions. When you redefine yourself and you've got this foundation of healthy responses to the world, and you've got your arms around how you feel about things, and you've got your mood is I don't want to say under control. That's the wrong way to put it. But you're the one that's managing your mood. The world isn't, your ex isn't, your kids, they're not managing your mood. You're managing it. You're being clear and upfront with yourself and others, with your boundaries and who you are. And now my challenge is to take this final step and define your governing purpose. A governing purpose is that operating system that runs as like a North Star in the back of your mind that guides your behavior. So an example, if part of my governing purpose is to be an honest man that is a good example to those around him. And I have a buddy says, hey, we can rob this bank and we can make a ton of money robbing this bank, and it'll be easy because it's a really old bank in Hurricane and they don't have hardly any good locks there. I'd have to think, okay, we could do that. And then think, but wait a minute, I'm honest and I want to be a good example, and honest people that are good examples don't rob banks. So I'd have to say no. So you see how this governing purpose will guide my behaviors. It'll guide the type of decisions that I make. It'll really help if I have a solid definition of who I am. And after a divorce, and as you find your feet, one of the very best things to do is to just slow everything down and list 5 achievements or 10, list 5 or 10 qualities that you really like about yourself. And once you get those things and that juice going, create a paragraph that you can memorize or that you can look at now and again. That's called your governing purpose. And just refer to it now and again. As you face hard decisions, remembering your personal governing purpose will help you organize the resources that you have. It'll help you organize everything into a life map for your going forward. And if you define your governing purpose by yourself with a deep breath, lots of oxygen, then you're going to be in control of your responses to the world. And if you let other people define your governing purpose, if you let anger define your governing purpose or depression define your governing purpose, it'll pull you around and you won't feel that solid ground that you deserve to feel. And so that's kind of the way to meander through one bank of ideas of looking at how to manage a divorce well, how to manage some of the stuff that goes along with it. And it was a quick snapshot. And so I'm going to turn it to Lana to decide how to ask questions, if there is any, or how to participate, how you guys can maybe help each other with some of the stuff that you have that you might want to share.